Thanks for coming tonight. It's my pleasure to introduce Judith Page. Judith is an artist, curator, writer, and educator. Her work is known for its inventive use of materials and social commentary. She's received grants from the Gottlieb Foundation, the Pollock Krasner Foundation, and from the state of Florida, two each from each of those funders over the years. Her art's been discussed in Art in America, in the New York Times, and in Sculpture magazine, and she's exhibited her work at museums and galleries in New York, Miami, Cologne, Ridgefield, Connecticut. I think we know where that was.
The Aldrich.
Itami, Japan, Ghent, Belgium, Budapest, and Los Angeles. She was founding program director of the Algira Emerge. She taught at MICA, the Maryland Institute College of Art. She directed the traveling exhibition program for the Atlantic Center for the Arts, and is currently program director for Tree of Life, which is a newish foundation dedicated to supporting artists who are 60 years old and older. She's organized as a curator over 200 exhibitions and written articles, essays, and criticism for publications including Sculpture magazine and Art Papers. Her essay on Annette Messager is included in A Sculpture Reader, Contemporary Sculpture Since 1980. She studied art at the University of Kentucky and Transylvania University, and she's been teaching here in the MFA Fine Arts program at SVA since 2010. Please join me in welcoming Judith Page.
Okay, here we go. Let's see. Can everybody hear okay? Yes? All right. As long as I don't lose track here of my notes. I want to first thank SVA, especially Mark and Nick, who've helped put this together, but also Allison and JP, who aren't with us, I don't think. And they're great at getting everything organized and particularly setting up dates for the lecture. I'm also appreciative of being able to put together a lecture that wasn't focused on a particular exhibition or body of work, which normally is what happens when I give a talk about my work. And so I'm going to present work that I really want to talk about. Most of it is from the 21st century, starting in the year 2000. There's a couple of pieces from the mid-90s that really, I feel like were hallmarks or very influential pieces on the work that has come later. And so including some work that's almost never been seen in New York, and particularly my audio pieces that were part of installations that often I've shown images of the installation itself, but only now have figured out that I can put the audio into PowerPoint and it all works very seamlessly. It took a day or two of torture for this, but I was able to finally figure it out. And I'll start off by saying my art, since the beginning really of my art career, is focused on the human condition, and there's always been either the body itself or evidence of the body. And my recent work in particular explores the resilience of the human spirit played out with through the juxtaposition of my personal history with current and past political, social, and cultural events. And first I want to point out four slides here that I'll talk about individually because they're aspects of my art that I think are really important and that I've actually used a lot of these things way back in the beginning, and they continue to be a great part of my work. And the first one is an image from Coral Castle in Homestead, Florida, and Allie's probably the only person here who's ever been there, other than me, at least in this audience. And it's a perfect example of chance. And chance has always been a huge part of the way I work, and either through chance images or found and repurposed objects. And this is a really great example of a chance image, or something called pareidolia, which is finding images in clouds, and is really thought to be hardwired into all humans originally, because it enabled them to discern enemies, or if there was a figure coming through the background in the jungle or whatever. But it helped them survive to recognize faces. And now it seems like an eccentricity or an outsider art thing that people do is pulling images out of clouds or on your piece of toast or other like places. And I find it endlessly fascinating. This slide, Mount Vesuvius, and I'd have to say, if you've never been there, it's a very exciting place to visit, especially to walk into the caldera and feel the volcanic soil, because it's very warm. It's still an active volcano, and it feels like you're putting your hand on someone's forehead, feeling their feverish body. And, but the way it plays out in my work is I often use natural occurrences as metaphors for human emotions. And the third image is from Assisi, Italy. And this is, of course, graffiti, but it's not the graffiti that we think about in New York so much, but it's like things, words built up over the past, many, many years actually, and continue to overlay one over the other, until you can barely discern what's written there. And text is always an important part of my work, either spoken or written or sung. And the final of the 4 important things to mention is reading. And I know my students have already heard me give a lecture on this. If you've been in my class, I talk about how important reading is. I get many, many of my ideas through reading. And the reason I do is because, unlike a video or a movie where the images and the words are presented together, when you read, your brain is working, you're imagining whatever is being described or how the words play together in terms of what you're thinking about. And I will show you a number of pieces of text that I felt have been very influential on the work that I've done over the years. And this first one, Tacitus. Is there anybody in the audience who's read Tacitus at all? Not a single person. Well, you shouldn't miss it. He is, of all the Roman historians, is really the most readable. And that's because, and I'm going to play you actually the whole quote where this is a part of, but I found this particular part had a lot of meaning for my own work and the way I approach art, that I'm not interested, and you'll hear this soon, in entertaining particularly or making something beautiful. I'm more interested in making something meaningful. And so, yes, you have to read Tacitus. and as well as many other people to keep your brain worked out. In fact, I read some horrible quote today from Kanye West, who said, I shouldn't even bring this up, but I couldn't help it because it's so pertinent to what I think about. And he says he never reads books and never met a book that he even wanted to meet or something ridiculous. And I thought, oh, that man is so ignorant. This is horrible. Anyhow, okay, so let's leave Kanye West alone and go on to the annals of Imperial Rome. And this was an installation that I did in 1992 at the Orlando Museum of Art. And I was fortunate to get this wonderful, really perfect space, small room to do this installation. And it's based on the words of Tacitus, and it's audio and then visual. And the visual part of it are records mounted on top of record albums that used to belong to both my husband, my ex-husband, and myself, but when we decided to break up, we threw all our possessions, or we wrote our possessions on a tiny pieces of paper and threw them in some bowl, and we picked them out like that. And so he got the whole turntable and receiver and speakers, and I got all the record albums. And so I kept them for a number of years before I knew what to do with them, because at that point I thought, why would I buy another turntable? I'm getting the tape player. And so anyhow, so in a way, the collapse of the Roman Empire, of course it wasn't completely collapsed at this point, was an analogy to the breakup of our relationship. And that's only one aspect of this whole piece. But anyhow, so it's the records, it's this found objects that were found behind my studio. I had a big orange warehouse as a studio, and there was railroad tracks behind it, and there was like an endless array of like wonderful stuff to be found there. And so these are things I collected over the years. And as I played this tape, I mean, basically what I did in terms of the so-called music or songs is I had specific quotes from Tacitus that I felt had a strong relationship to contemporary times. And there's some things mentioned. These are the first four. I didn't want to go on too long here. And one of the important things I want you to think about is judicial murder, because this is the first time I ever heard that term. And then in thinking about it, I thought, wow, there's a lot of ways that you can commit judicial murder, and we might not be committing the kind of murders or executions of, during the Roman Empire, executions are carried out in a different way often now. This was a very primitive production. My friend who's a musician in Florida helped me on it. We created all the voices with a guitar whammy. I mean, and they're all my voices, by the way. And then he added sound effects, and it was recorded, I think, I was talking to him not too long ago. He said, oh, that was one of the really primitive ones we did on a reel-to-reel with a mic set up, and that was about it. So, oh, and one of the songs is also about superstition, which I think is a interesting thing to think about now. But overall, I think the real reason I made it, this was 1992, it was like right before Clinton was elected. There was a lot going on in this country, and I was thinking, in reading Tacitus, because his voice is so contemporary, how we don't learn from history. So here we go. Here's a detail, another detail, another detail.
The investigation and record of these details concerning the autocrat may prove useful. Indeed, it is from such studies, from the experience of others, that most men learn to distinguish right and wrong, advantage and disadvantage. Few can tell them apart instinctively. So these accounts have their uses, but they are distasteful. What interests and stimulates readers is the geographical description, the changing fortune of a battle, the glorious death of a commander. My themes, on the other hand, concern cruel orders, unremitting accusations, treacherous friendships, innocent men ruined, a conspicuously monotonous glut of downfalls and their monotonous causes.
He seduced the army with bonuses, and his cheap food policy was successful bait for civilians. Indeed, he attracted everybody's goodwill by the enjoyable gift of peace. Then he gradually pushed ahead and absorbed the functions of the Senate, the officials, and even the law. Opposition did not exist. War or judicial murder had disposed of all men of spirit. Upper-class survivors found that slavish obedience was the way to succeed, both politically and financially.
Meanwhile, at Rome, councils, senate, knights increasingly became servile. The more distinguished men were, the greater their urgency and insincerity. They must show neither satisfaction at the death of one emperor, nor gloom at the accession of another, so their features were carefully arranged in a blend of tears and smiles, mourning and flattery.
The night looked like ending in a disastrous criminal outbreak, but this was averted by a stroke of luck. Suddenly, in a clear sky, the light of the moon was seen to decline. The soldiers did not know why this was, and detected an omen of their own situation. The waning moon seemed to provide an analogy to their own efforts. Success would only crown the measures they were adopting if the moon goddess shone brightly again. To produce this result, they made a clattering of brass instruments and blew blasts on every sort of trumpet. The light seemed stronger, and they were happy. Then it looked dimmer, and they were mournful. Finally, clouds hid it from view altogether. Men's minds, once unbalanced, are ready to believe anything. And now they howled that heaven was sickened by their crimes, and endless hardships were in store for them.
Okay, just to orient you in terms of the emperors, the first song was discussing the accession of it was discussing Augustus and getting ready to welcome Tiberius as an emperor. And the second one goes in, the first one, I'm sorry, was Tacitus talking about his writing, and then it went to Augustus, and then Tiberius, and continued with Tiberius, but the whole piece goes through Nero, which was where the annals ended. Now, they haven't found all of the annals, and I'm sure they never will. There was, I think, half of them that remained out of 30. Okay, so now we're into Mexico City, and another aspect of my work that is repeated often, and I call it dark repetition. It's repetition with angst or a little bit of danger. And Here is Chartres Cathedral in France, and anthropomorphism, which is also crops up in my work again and again, as you'll soon see. All right, this is the work I made in the year 2000. The series is called Strangers in a Foreign Land, and it was created, this is my first use of tar gel, which I really, like a friend of mine actually introduced me to it. He came to my studio and said, have you ever tried tar gel? It's a golden medium, and I'm sure many of you have used it. And I love the way that it implies movement. It's not just a static image. It really is like the patient movement of time with the possibility of some catastrophic event like lava flowing over a surface coming into a community. And this is also the first use of pink, which I've used a lot since then. And I never use color unless it has a real specific meaning to the content of my work. And I don't really like pink. I would never wear pink clothes, but there was something about it that was so perfect in the conjunction with what I wanted to say, which is really loss of innocence is certainly one thing. And the pink was perfect to express that. It's not only the loss of innocence, but the reality of adulthood. While somewhat we still have that childish innocence, or at least I hope that we still have it. I know I do, to my detriment at times. And also the third thing is time. The magazines that I used, this was a collage on magazine pages with tar gel and black gesso, is about how celebrity or notoriety or fame changes over time, because the images in these pieces were all famous people. The book was Ballew's pictorial. It was pre-Civil War, and I felt like nobody knows these people. It's like they were really important in their time, and just thinking about how they're dancing through the dark. And so when I made these pieces, I like danced in front of a mirror and made sketches of movement so I could make them more convincing. All right, this piece was also done in 2002, along with two other installation pieces that I will show you. It was this year of transition. I moved out of Tribeca right before 9/11, maybe a month. I would have been in the frozen zone. Where I lived was very close to the World Trade Center. And for a year I didn't have a studio, but I had several shows lined up, and was trying to figure how I could make the pieces for these shows. So basically it was doing pieces in components, and where I could work on a small drawing table in my apartment. And so this piece was like this confluence of events. Also, it's chance, because this is my childhood diary that by accident ended up in New York. I had meant to bring my tax records, but instead I brought strange memorabilia. And so I decided that I wanted to make a double diary, like a visual diary on top of the text diary. And so that's exactly what this is. And I don't know if you can read some of the things, like I just, pulled out certain aspects of text. And the one on the right's always kind of endearing to me because my brothers and sisters' greatest pleasure was finding my diary and reading it. And you can see the little crayon in the middle. That was one of them decided to make additions to it. And here's the one on the right is also one of my favorites because it's just so funny. It's Tom Loves Me, I think, but I'm not sure about Bob. So where was my mind back then? And then the one on the left, I don't know. It was this strange conjunction of text and image. It says, "Dear Diary, I'm having a good time at camp." Okay. That piece has been shown many, many times because it's so easy to ship, of course, but it's hellish to install. It takes like 2 days, and it's a horrible thing. Anyhow, this is another one of those installations that I made in 2002. This is a detail of the whole piece, which is about 12 by 16 feet. And tar gel is such a flexible medium. You can use it in all sorts of ways. And this, it's like I poured puddles of it in different configurations, so it really came off sort of like pond scum. And what I was thinking of course, it's the pink color, and a big part of it what was going on in the world at the time, and it's innocence and depravity all together. But I think I talk to my students all the time about be careful about the materials you use, know your materials, and beware of toxicity. But there's also other things to beware of, controlling how the materials react in various circumstances. And this was a case where this was a huge thing to install with all these little drips, and I did it with rubber cement for the most part, and not really thinking that I'm installing something that's acrylic on a floor with acrylic varnish. And if you'll notice it, you'll see all these little bubbles on the surface of the blobs, and that was actually caused by the heat of the spotlights, which I didn't think of. And then when I came to deinstall it, what I didn't realize is that it bonded to the floor. And so I had this like horrible moment, like, oh my God, what am I gonna do? And so I went through, I think everybody that was there deinstalling their work came together to help me, and we started thinking about what could help, and we decided ice, like you take chewing gum off, and so that's finally what we did, but the whole installation except for the bear heads was destroyed. And I'm sure I'm never going to recreate it. Okay, here's a perfect example of dark repetition. The review of Mouseketeer finalists. In 2002 also was when American Idol began, and probably most of you, I'm sure you weren't around when the Mouseketeers were on TV, but that was like a really big thing. And so I started thinking a lot about young people and beauty contests, and you know, particularly like American Idol, when you're you know, just as a young person, you're out there in front of thousands of people, or really millions of people. So anyhow, that was going on in my mind. And then, but I didn't do anything with it really until 2004, when I was thinking about the war in Iraq. And so these are paintings of the original Musketeers. And in the background, I've written a text that was written over and over again, recreated what I thought their life story might be if they'd been of the age to be a soldier and serve in Iraq. I guess I'd been so thinking about this a lot because I had many friends who were in Vietnam. And it was probably one of the most traumatic things that happened to them. I don't know that any of my friends that were in Vietnam ever fully recovered. But I had one friend who was drafted out of art school when he was like around 18 or 19 and and he then went ahead and joined Special Forces and ended up in a very short period of time from art school to the jungles of Vietnam, where they played pool during the day and ran around and killed people at night. It was like a really horrendous thing coming from this innocence of a small town southern boy to what ended up. So these are the pieces I did. Again, it's tar gel, black gesso, graphite. These are 3 of them. And at the same time I was doing those paintings, I was doing a series of sculptures that actually started in the mid-90s. I had an idea that I was going to make a sculpture every day for a year, but that quickly fell by the wayside because I really don't like assignments, particularly when they're given by me. And so I decided that I would just make the sculptures, and so they're like a visual diary, or a sculptural diary, I would say. And so they all have a date and then more of a descriptive title. And these are some of them. This is made from a Wonder Woman Pez, who was a great idol of mine when I was growing up, the only female superhero. My high school senior class. The fan was my father's. I saved all the plugs and everything. I may revert it to a fan one of these days. And old sculpture parts and photographs. And here again, getting rid of all of the high school memorabilia that I mistakenly brought with me to New York. All right, here is the next quote I want to talk about. And it really, sometimes you just read along and then you read something and your mind goes wild just imagining what it could be. And this was a way of making anonymous denunciations. And it was, this is in Italy, of course, because this is a biography of Leonardo. And that there were receptacles placed around where you could make these anonymous denunciations. And they were called holes of truth, or that was one of the ways. And so I started imagining holes of truth, like what could that be? And I was thinking there are mouths of truth, the sculptures in Italy you'll see with an open mouth that people put things in, but I couldn't really find any real specific descriptions, and I thought, well, it had to be something where they could get the denunciations out and read them, or was it like a little bulletin board around the city? I don't know, but that's the great thing about reading, is you don't really sometimes have to know. It sparks things, and your mind goes wild imagining the possibilities. So I was doing a big solo show in Albany, and was thinking of a title for the show and a specific piece that I was going to make that would be for the show. And so this is some images of some of the work you've seen in slides that was in this show. And on the back wall is the title piece, which is also called Holes of Truth. And that also came from a quote from Plutarch. I was lucky, my sister-in-law is direct descendant of the first governor of Kentucky, and she has like I can't tell you how many, she's a hoarder also, like all sorts of books and papers and china and furniture and like amazing stuff that her family's accumulated over the years. And of course, important things have gone to museums, but she gave me a copy from the 1800s of Plutarch's Lives. And so it was a damaged copy when, you know, a bunch of pages were slashed. And so I thought, okay, I'm going to make a piece in the spirit of Plutarch's Lives. And I didn't really know how it was going to come together, but basically, Plutarch's, it's called parallel lives. It's like, you know, there would be a Greek and a Roman paired together. And it was really about the influence of character, good and bad, on the lives and destinies of men. And so I thought, well, I'm going to make a portrait piece about the important people in my lives, for good or for bad. And so here's some of them. I mean, there was 217 of them, or pairs, and they're paired with anonymous constellations. So they're really sort of in a black hole. This is my grandfather, my grandmother, and two Icelandic artists. This is one, Johann Eiffels, that were really influential friends of mine. It's Kristen Eiffels. But the really important thing about this, as I've talked about the importance of pink, is also the importance of green. And when I came to New York, after I was here for a while, I started using green a little bit here and a little bit there, and I realized I was completely starved for green. It was just like, oh God, New York is so bleak at times, and being living in Florida for 20 years with this, it just made me bring it in, but for very specific reasons. And what this piece led to, Wakulla Springs, is there was a conceptual artist who actually I had exhibited his work at Valencia, where I was curator, who was killed by an alligator in Wakulla Springs. And it was a really bizarre story. And in fact, it affected people all over Florida that knew him through the art world. I even have friends who remembered his student ID flashing on the television screen and hearing about the story. So here is the piece. It was a very simple piece. Actually, at Islip Art Museum, they had a tiny little room in their carriage house that was for sound pieces. And so I wanted to make a piece that had to do with death and regeneration, thinking about what happened to Eugene after he was killed, or that's my name for him, that wasn't the person's real name. Of course, you know, this is a story that I used for my own purposes. So what I'm gonna let you listen to now is we come into the point where Eugene's body has been found and disposed of. And then there's a song, and these pieces, in contrary to the Tacitus piece, I wanted to use all my own words. I wanted to write the music, I wanted to write the text, and I worked with the same musician who was wonderful, and he helped with all the music and recording. And so here we go.
Eugene wasn't so lucky. He put up a struggle, got bit a little too hard, passed out and drowned. He was found later that sweet April day in a root, flapping in the current like a piece of old sawgrass, kind of ragged and silvery. There wasn't even an ounce of blood left in his body. The park rangers searched almost 3 days before they found that big gator. He had evidence of the crime on him, too. A tattered strand of Eugene's red t-shirt was wrapped around one of those monster teeth. It looked like dental floss. The gator was convicted without a trial, shot quickly and carefully between those beady eyes, and hauled off to a handbag factory in the back of the ranger's pickup. At least Eugene got to ride in an ambulance. He must have been a horrible sight, white as the sheet that covered him, and doughy looking too. But he was clean, so clean, gore and blood all washed away in the river.
Dirty laundry, grubby feet, bloody neck wounds, rotten meat, grimy fingers, punctured brains, greasy skillets and a copper stain. Water can clean almost anything, but can it clean you? Lots of mustard, hiding snot, and doggy doo-doo, toenail rot, scummy molars, crusty pans, soiled diapers in garbage cans. Water can clean almost anything, but can it clean you? Water, water, give me a drink. Water, water, I want a bath. Water, water, you smell foul. Water, water, you're dying now. Rancid rivers, slimy streams, sludge-filled ponds and acid dreams, filthy seas, mucked up wells, poison creek beds, ocean smells. Water can clean almost anything, but can it clean you? Water, water, give me a drink. Water, water, I want a bath. Water, water, you smell foul. Water, water, you're dying now.
So this use of green led in, I was given another great opportunity. Stephen Main curated a show called Artists that basically photographs as canvas, that was the name of it, and asked me to do an installation at the Aldrich Museum of some of the portraits that he had seen in my studio. And so this one, this whole group of work is my effort to make a different kind of portrait that uses painting and also photography that reveals more about the subject than either one would reveal on its own. And this particular installation was all students of mine at MICA that were posed in front of their art. So you can see it slightly creeping through. Then I want to talk about a little bit about, there was another body of these. Of course, plasma had a lot to do, I call it plasma green, had a lot to do with a substance said to be excreted by mediums during trances, as it was described in some books I read, but also like plasma screen TVs and plasma in your blood, and plasma is one of the fundamental states of matter. Anyhow, but the black hole portraits is the other concurrent group I did. And this is a quote of Donna Tartt. If you haven't read her, you certainly should. But talking about beauty. So the next installation I wanted to do was going to have beauty as very much a part of it. And so here are examples of some of the portraits. The gallery was in Connecticut. There was an antechamber, I guess that's a good way to put it. I love those in tombs. There's always one little room you come in and there's things on the wall, and then you go further in and then there's something else, so you sort of wind your way through. But portraits like these were lining the wall of this tiny room. And then as you walk through a little tiny hallway, there were little doll arms that were stuck into the wall on either side of the door. And then this is the installation itself. It was just basically I made blood drippings with tar gel and of course color, and adhered them to the wall with rubber cement. And believe it or not, since 2002, I have a test piece hanging in my apartment, and it's never fallen down, which is a real testament to something. Okay, so in this case, the story, the whole piece is called Blood Music, and it's a story of a cheerleader who was strangled by her bra in front of the university campus. And it's a famous unsolved murder of my childhood that, in a way, was sort of the first thing that woke me up. Took away some of my innocence. It's like, oh, the world isn't as great as I thought it would be. So anyhow, this, what you're going to hear again is you're coming into sort of the middle of it, and also in these pieces, one thing I didn't point out is the narrator is childlike, is speaking from the childlike innocent, and then the music is really speaking more from an adult point of view. And there's those two levels that are in all of the pieces.
The ambulance driver who carried away her body said Bonnie looked like a marble goddess laid out on that stretcher. So pristine, so sublime. Even the bruises on her neck didn't mar her nobility, and the drop of blood at the corner of her lips sparkled in the morning light like a ruby fallen from a royal tiara. Well, you can imagine the stories and the extensive investigation that followed. Rumors flew around like arrows looking for a target. Everyone was questioned. Even the head librarian was suspected. Weeks passed, then months without any leads. Finally, Bonnie's murder disappeared from the news completely. But the girls remembered. We thought of Bonnie's death when we rushed to our dorms after dark, hearts pounding at the sight of every strange shadow. And we thought of her death in the front seat of our boyfriends' cars when they slid their sweaty hands under our sweaters and into our bras. Then as we left school, married, and moved away, Bonnie Ann just disappeared from our minds too. He found Aphrodite, battered and broken, in a pile of trash just outside Hoboken. body, bored or terrified, a banker in his lobby. The tellers complained they couldn't do their work. A customer yawned and gave his dick a jerk. The bank hired the parasitas to take her to the dump. They scratched her and they beat her and said she was a cunt. Then the parasitas and a couple of their friends broke off her lovely arms to use for bowling pins. For 47 years, Aphrodite lay alone until a sharp-eyed artist dug her out and took her home. The artist scrubbed her down for almost 40 days. Then he put her on a pedestal so she could meet his gaze. After dinner every night, when they were all alone, he sucked on her 2 nipples and hardened up his bone. When friends asked him why he loved her so, he replied, she has character, who could ask for more? The artist said of all her quaint and tragic charms, what he loved the most was the absence of her arms.
Okay. Now on to F. Scott Fitzgerald, and we're winding things down here. I know we're almost running out of time. I read Scott Fitzgerald's The Crack-Up, which I hadn't really read before, in thinking about a show that I was going to do at Leslie Heller. And this is a quote that's actually pretty widely known, but I found it was very pertinent to me, is because anytime I wake up in the night and can't sleep, it's always 3 o'clock in the morning. And I thought, wow, I'd really like to, bring that into this exhibition. And so here's the initial piece that came out of it. Night Walk. Again, it's part of the 365 Dumb Days series, but really it evolved into being more about technology becoming obsolete and the aging of the body. And this is Boombox and Beaver. Time and television. And what you can't see, well, that stick is a very special stick that was probably took generations to incise in a creek bed. And then at the top of it is a lens from an old pair of my glasses. Crossing the desert. And one last cut, and that's a little pocket knife sitting on the top. Then occasionally I write things for myself that I think are better than anybody else could write. And so this is about the other body of work that was in this show, and called Dreams of Power. And it's basically was started from a New York Times Magazine article about Obama's administration. And there were all these wonderful portrait photographs of the expected administration. And I just started thinking about them in light of the piece I did many years before, Strangers in a Foreign Land, where all of these people were completely unknown for the most part, and thinking about what would happen to these people. And so these are some of the Dreams of Power. And of course, the photographs themselves were drastically photoshopped to hopefully never be traced back. Or recognized as an individual, which I didn't want. I wanted to represent all politicians. And finally, what I've been working on recently is using the technique of pareidolia, working on some photographs that I shot of the bombing, the shock and awe bombing of Baghdad, and finding, you know, with more than 10 years since that took place, really trying to pull out of the background things that I thought were important that were only now revealed. And finally, what I want to play the sort of the end of the Seeking Fragrance Eugene Stickler tape, because it's really more representative of my philosophy of life and also my philosophy of teaching as well. But Seeking Fragrance in itself is from a Mishima book, Runaway Horses, where he talks about, or it's talked about in this book, or this is where I found out about it, is a state between previous life and reincarnation, where one is this childlike figure nourished on the fragrance of burning incense.
What comes to my mind most often when I think of Eugene is the blood flowing out of his punctured body, spreading through the water, so beautiful, so thin, yet still full of life, undulating with every movement of the water, gradually becoming part of Hakila River, being absorbed into the roots of plants, evaporating into the air, making its way into the mouths of fish, birds, and little baby gators. I found a baby gator head in a junk store on Orange Avenue that must have been nourished by Eugene's blood. The little gator had a studied look, arrogant and evasive, that was so typical of Eugene. Now he sits on my bookshelf, resting on Jansen's History of Art, next to that voodoo candle that Melanie gave me. Every now and then the light catches those red marble eyes, and specks of blood fly around the room. His mouth is wide open, like he's waiting for the big bite.
I wanna be fertilizer. I want my flesh, my blood, my gore. I wanna be fertilizer. Break down and nothing more. I wanna be fertilizer. I want my chemistry pure. I wanna be fertilizer. More potent than cow manure. I wanna be fertilizer. I wanna be in your food. I wanna be fertilizer. Drug a kid and change your mood. I wanna be fertilizer. I wanna be fertilizer. Fertilizer, fertilizer, get together now. Fertilizer, fertilizer, live forever now. I wanna be fertilizer. I want my flesh, my blood, my gore. I wanna be fertilizer. Break down and nothing more.
Okay, it's over. My pleasure.
Thank you so much, Judith. That was like really amazing to see your work. And my question was, well, I have a lot of questions, but mostly it was really to hear the songs and the sound. I was wondering, I guess, two parts. Like one, how are they installed, or how do you install the sound? And then also, is writing a huge part of your process when you're, because as much as reading then, would you say?
It comes and goes. The way I had the sound set up is, remember the Boombox and Beaver piece? That was what I used in all these installations. Well, actually not in the first one, because it was at the museum and they had something, but you know, it was installed with speakers up in the top of the room, sort of in an obscure place, and it was on a loop that ran continuously. I mean, this is old style. There's many ways to do it much better now. Okay, any other questions?
Dealing with imagery and text, how important is narrative compared to, let's say, just having fragmented bits of information where the viewer kind of makes up the narrative on their own? So how much, like, for you, what do you want to give to the viewer, and what do you want the viewer to kind of imagine on their own?
Well, the audio pieces are, you know, sort of a whole different thing, the opportunity to get an installation. The text pieces where I only fragment them, and actually there's many other pieces that I've done similarly. I have my high school diary, no, junior high diary, which was another interesting one. And also I did a whole series of books, that books as drugs. And so it's like I read all the books I read for a certain number of years. I made them into sculptures. And it's like I really love doing the narrative pieces. Now, I'm working on some other ones, but they'll be very different than the earlier ones. I had intended it to be a much larger series, but just the cost of doing them and the time and everything. And if I didn't actually have a location to do one of these pieces, it was sort of hard to work out what the installation would actually be. So yeah, and the ones with the full out narrative, to more specifically answer your question, in a way, it's similar to the text pieces because the narrative is like totally made up and really open-ended, and so that I'm assuming who listens to it between the sort of the childlike voice narrator and the tougher songs, that there's also a narrative discontinuity. Yes. Wait. Yes. Yeah.
Can you tell some more about this tar medium that you use?
Oh, tar gel?
Tar gel.
It's from Golden Paint Company. You can go right down to New York Central or any place. They probably have it at Da Vinci. The only thing about it is it takes almost never really dries. It's always flexible. And well, the people that have used it, you understand the problems, because I used to have big pieces of plastic sheeting hanging up over my work table because any kind of dust would stick in it, and sometimes it worked and sometimes it didn't. And you know, there's all weird aspects of it that it's sort of mimics resin, except it's not toxic, and I don't like using toxic materials. So
can you stick stuff in it and it'll stay? Like, could you put stuff in the tar gel and it would stick around?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, Golden Paint, if you go on Golden Paint Company's website, they have all the technical specs on everything that they make.
Thank you.
When you started to work with sound?
1992.
And how it started? Like, first it was the idea about sculpture, and then you started to...
No, it's really about installation, and that when I did this installation at the Orlando Museum, the content of the installation came from text, and it was just an idea I got that I hadn't really thought about before. It's like I used to write songs when I was a kid a lot, and also wrote quite a bit, and I felt like that would make it somewhat more meaningful, because I really wanted people to think about how, you know, the continuity and discontinuity of time, how people don't learn from history, how does the past relate to what's happening now and in the future.
I was just curious. I know that you said you lived in Florida for 20 years, and now your studio's in Brooklyn, correct? How do you feel this kind of shift in environment? You're saying the green is no longer present, and now you're in Brooklyn. Has it really seeped into your work yet, or are you still pulling back and grabbing the green and not willing to let go?
Well, I've been in Brooklyn for 20 years too. I'll tell you, the change it made certainly was scale. When I lived in Florida, I shared a 5,000 square foot warehouse with 4 other artists that was like $750 a month. It was like 16-foot ceilings, and we all had 1,000 square feet plus common space, outdoor space, loading dock, everything. It was really fabulous. It was hard to give up. Well, I didn't give up until they tore down the building. I kept it until that happened, even when I was in New York.
So you're telling us to move to Florida?
Huh? No, I'm not telling you that at all. There's other reasons that I left Florida. I mean, I may end up there, who knows, but because I certainly do miss the climate. But it was time to go. I'd done everything I'd wanted to do at the time. Showed where, you know, you don't have to like scramble to show. In Florida, it's like things come to you, and the whole academic community is very connected. And several of my friends that taught at other schools, we all moved to New York at the same time. And so they're still part of my network. Well, basically, the pieces that were based on actual events were totally changed by me. I mean, that was the starting point, and a lot of aspects of it that they're correct, but then, of course, you haven't heard the whole narrative of the tape where I go on and speculate why this happened, and it's like with Eugene Stickler, was this a conceptual piece that he was doing? And I say, no, it wasn't a conceptual work of art because he didn't have a photographer there, and that no conceptual artist would do something like this without having a photographer. And so, you know, there's a lot of things, and then I get into this whole thing about mating season and and so it's, yeah, both of the pieces, the names are changed, of course, and but actually the Bonnie Ann Brown piece, the second one, is still written about. I mean, just recently, that it was in the paper again in Kentucky that they had reopened the case yet another time and thought they had some new evidence, but you know, that's like so many years ago that it's not going to happen, I don't think. I'm sure they probably didn't have DNA at the time, but yeah. And if I get together with people from Tallahassee, which is where Wakulla Springs is, you know, that subject can come up because it was sort of like the shock of a friend, this happening to a friend, and being so strange. Why was he snorkeling past the barriers in Wakulla River? Because they have very distinct barriers where you can snorkel and when you don't snorkel. So I have speculations on all of it.
I was wondering how, since your work is so narrative and there's also this strong figurative component.
Can you talk a little bit louder?
Yeah.
I can't hear you.
Since your work is narrative and it has this strong figurative component, I'm wondering what the reception for the work has been in New York, if you feel like there's been a lot of support for that type of
None
imagery.
of that work has ever been shown in New York. Actually, the Eugene piece was at Islip Art Museum, but you know, there weren't a lot of people that, there aren't a lot of people that always go out there to the carriage house, and the other piece was done in Connecticut, so really, you know, they really haven't been shown in New York at all. I know I sent tapes out to a number of people when I had a lot of tape copies made and sent them to various people. And it got written about, at least the one at Islip did, a number of times, but I'm not sure some of the writers really understood it. But that's okay. Press is press sometimes. They appreciated it. But I think it frightened other people that I played it for.
You can make a song about it.
What?
You can make a song about it. It would be amazing.
Would you speak more about the idea of judicial murder that you brought up and how that relates?
Well, it's like I never thought about judicial murder before, but when I read about it in Tacitus, of course, judicial murder was murder sanctioned by law. For example, there's one of the songs that's in that piece where a young girl, you know, they said, let's see, young virgins, a young girl was executed, basically hung with her brother and thrown on the Gemonian steps. And, but what Tacitus says is that, that this couldn't happen to a virgin. They wouldn't allow a virgin to be executed, so the hangman violated the young girl with the noose beside her and then threw her body on the Gemonian steps. So in a way, that's like using the law, and of course many of the other law, I mean, I don't know, the laws changed with frequency in Rome, particularly as the empire sort of galloped on to craziness and through Tiberius to Caligula to Nero. But contemporary judicial murder, things that are sanctioned by law, I mean, it could be laws against providing health insurance to the poor. I mean, you know, you can really think of a lot of ideas about judicial murder that it could be a slow death rather than a quick one. I mean, we do have people executed for various murders, but not that many states, well, I guess enough of them do have capital punishment. But you think of the other ways the government works against its citizens. Okay. Oh, one more.
Hi, Judy. I enjoyed your talk. Have you kept in touch with your classmates And have they seen your work, and what do they think about where you use the pictures from your school?
You know, I always thought it would be interesting to do that Bonnie Ann Brown piece in Lexington, my hometown. I mean, I tell you, I hate to tell you this, I did a big show there at the Center of Contemporary Art in 1986, and it caused a huge controversy and got all sorts of hate mail, and my mother was so horrified. She said, "I've never seen so many penises in my life." And I thought, oh, she hasn't seen many then, has she? Well, thank you for being a great audience.